Which group of human cells are said to have changed the world in ways that no one expected? Find out on Talking with Henrietta, coming up next. Hi, I'm Henrietta. Welcome to the show. In 1951, a doctor at Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore removed cells from the cervix of a woman who later died of cancer. That woman was Henrietta Lacks. The cells the doctor removed continued to live and grow like no other cells had grown. The doctors called the cells HeLa cells, using the first two letters of Henrietta Lacks' first and last names. In the years since those cells were taken, they have been used all over the world, and they've led to discoveries and treatments for numerous diseases. But the way those cells were originally taken and used has led to multiple controversies involving family bitterness, charges of exploitation, racism, poverty, and greed. The guests on my show today will talk about some of these issues and shed more light on what those immortal lines of HeLa cells have meant to the world and how Henrietta Lacks' legacy is shaping our social discourse. Lisa Teeler is seated on my left. Ms. Teeler is the interim chair of the African American Community Health Advisory Committee, a nonprofit organization that's dedicated to eliminating health disparities across generations and diverse communities through education and services. In addition to being an author, speaker, and a former employee at Genentech, Ms. Teeler is the former co-chair for the Patient Family Advisory Committee for Mills Peninsula Service. Gloria Brown is seated to my right. Ms. Brown is the founder and former chair of the African American Health Advisory Committee, and she served as the manager for community benefits at Mills Peninsula Health Services before she retired. We are fortunate at this time to have one of Henrietta Lacks' family members, David Lacks Jr., on the phone to talk with us. But first, I'd like to thank you, Lisa, Gloria, David Lacks Jr., for joining us. And so, David, since you're on the phone, let's start with you. Could you tell us when you and your family found out that these cells being used all over the world belonged to your grandmother?
Well, we first learned about the cell chance encounter 20 years after they were taken, removed from our body. My aunt happened to be invited to a doctor's house for dinner, and he recognized her last name as Barbette Lacks. And he's like, Lacks, are you related to Henrietta Lacks? And she was like, yes, that's my mother-in-law, or my deceased mother-in-law. And she like, really? And then he wanted to tell her that he's been using her cells and he's been using her for. At that time, my aunt couldn't believe what she was hearing, so she had to abruptly leave dinner and went home and reported it back to her husband and Henrietta's husband, then David Lacks. But at that point, all we really knew about the cells, all family knew about the cells, was that they were used to cure polio and they went to space. It wasn't until 2010 with the release of Rebecca Skloot's book that the family really learned the extent of the HeLa cells and what they was used for.
So, David, let me just interrupt you, because on the screen we saw a picture of the family and we saw a picture of the author, Rebecca. And so,
yes,
when your aunt found out about it and she told Henrietta's husband, what did you all do then? I assume that was a shock for you.
That was back in 1971, when she first went, like I said, 20 years after she had 20 years after Henrietta had passed. My aunt went to told my uncle and told my father and the rest of the my uncles, and they went out and tried to learn stuff and find out exactly what was going on, but they kept on hitting dead end roadblocks, or nobody would release the information. It wasn't until Rebecca came along and her and my aunt went on what I call a journey to learn about Henrietta Lacks and learn about the HeLa cells. That all this information came to light on that they had access to this type of information. Other people was spoke with and giving it to them.
And what
so back in 1971, like I said, every time they tried to find out information about it, they really wasn't. Nobody was really telling them too much.
Sure, except that one particular doctor who told the family about it in the beginning.
Yes. I mean, I'm sure the doctor told them a little bit, but like I said, to get Henrietta's medical records and get details, they was meeting with no success.
Sure.
But yeah, the doctor happened to be like one of the few who was knowledgeable of Henrietta Lacks, because most of them thought she was like Helen Lane, Helen Lawson, but he knew the origin of where those cells came from, where a lot of people didn't, because they used other aliases and other names.
Sure.
For the origin of those cells.
And when the author, Rebecca, when she came to you, she came to the family, did you believe her? Did you, how did that relationship, did you look at her suspiciously?
Well, like I said, she pretty much approached my aunt, and my aunt didn't take to her at first, because like I said, we have had other people in the past come to us or want to, tell us information or want to get information from us, and it turned out to be false or, misleading. So she was skeptical. But with Rebecca, she kept on trying, and it took over a year from her first contact until she actually met with my Aunt Barbara and to go out with her. And the reason my Aunt Barbara eventually decided to, meet with Rebecca is because she was persistent. She didn't give up. She kept on calling my aunt, and she would give her little tidbits of information that she learned. When she learned something, she would call my aunt and leave a message on the phone, telling her what was going on, what she discovered. And then over time, that built up trust. So she's like, okay, well, this woman not going away. Let's see what we can learn. And plus, it was a burning desire for my aunt Dale to know about her mother and to know about the cells.
So, David,
and Rebecca's proved that yes.
Yeah, David, thank you. I'm thinking we have two guests in the studio whom our viewers haven't seen yet, except in the very beginning of the show. And I would like to, while you listen to them for a moment or two, David, have them tell us what the story means to them, what you've just now heard, heard David say.
Well, I know for me it was a life-changing experience because my background is a technical background and I've done research, and for years I had been using HeLa cells and had no idea that these cells came from an African-American woman until I read Rebecca's book. And early on in the book it tells you that these cells came from this woman and talks about the initials from her first and last name. And I can't tell you the emotion that I felt. It's indescribable how I was feeling. This overwhelming sense of, I can't even describe it. And in fact, I just ended up breaking down and crying because I didn't even know how to process what I was feeling.
Well, before you talk about processing it, what were you doing with the cells?
Well, the cells grow very well.
In a petri dish.
Yes, in all kinds of different testing equipment, and we use them to do research.
And what were you doing? Can you tell us?
We were doing cancer research, looking at various proteins and antibodies that could down the road be used to help with cancer. And we've been using them for years.
And I want to assume the cells are in a petri dish. Did they just stay there? Did you have to grow them?
Yeah, you grow them, you can split them, you can freeze them and save them for later and then thaw them out. I mean, these cells are amazing. They grow and obviously you have to have the right conditions for them to grow, but they grow so well. And that you actually have to, when I start working them, we'd have to use the cells in a separate lab because we didn't want the HeLa cells to actually infect other cell lines that we were working with because they grow so prolifically.
And these weren't cancer cells. These were healthy cells.
Well, no, they're all cancer cells, but they were different types of cells. But HeLa cells is sort of like the gold standard because they grow so well.
That's what I meant.
Yes.
The HeLa cells they still remain the cancer cells.
Yes, yes. And so...
What were you told about the cells?
I was told nothing.
Well,
there was nothing that, I mean, besides just sort of the technical aspects that they were, you know, cancer cells taken from, you know, someone, but they never said who that person was. They never said anything. There was never any information except for the technical aspects of the cells. I never knew who the cells came from.
And what difference does it make?
It makes a big difference, particularly if you're a person of color working in research.
Why?
Because you feel like I have been using this woman's cell line and had no idea that they came from her. And for me, it was just all different types of feelings. It was like, I should have known. And then a part of me was like, wow, this is a woman that I didn't know that is no longer with us, that continues to contribute to science and medicine. And it's indescribable, all the feelings I was having at that time.
Do you know about the other cells that you work with?
Some of them, some cells, because some of them aren't. Some are human, some are from animals. I mean, you kind of generically kind of know, but you don't really know all the details. You know, sometimes there's, you know, for privacy reasons, you don't always for patient privacy reasons, you don't always know who the cells came from.
So could these cells have been treated the same way for privacy reasons? That's why you didn't know.
Could have been. There's always that possibility. But somehow, just for me, being an African-American woman, to not know that this, and I guess when I heard the story, I guess that's the other thing, that they were taken without her permission and without her family's permission, kind of added to that whole thing that African-Americans and communities of color in general have a mistrust around scientific research. Because we know there's been a history of things that have been taken or things that have been done in the spirit of exploration and science that have been at the demise of people of color.
Sure. David, I'm just wondering, do you think it's emphasized that the family did not give its permission to have these cells taken and used? And many families are very, very reluctant to give their permission to have any body parts from a member used. Do you think your family, looking back, would have given their permission?
Like in some of my many talks, it's like, I guess, I always give an analogy of like if you at home and you have plenty of guests over, you have $2 on your dressing table, and you go upstairs and you come downstairs and there's $2 missing. You're going to be mad or upset about it because somebody took the $2. But had they asked, you would have probably said, sure, certainly. And that's how the family feels, like, okay, the cell was taken and it's done great for mankind, but they never asked us. And that's all you want, that kind of respect of somebody asking.
Well, I'm thinking not only asking you, but after the fact, telling you. And I'm just wondering if they didn't get permission in the first place, how would you have felt later if they told you this is what we had done?
Yeah, like I said, 20 years, we learned about 20 years later after the fact. And the fact that when he removed the cells, he knew within a week that he had something special because our cells did something that no other cells did. When other cells died after a week or two, hers kept multiplying and growing. Like she said earlier, they're one of the most resilient cells there is. They're pretty much gold standard. So the doctor, when he removed the cells, knew right away. So it was like room telling us that, you know, we had something special. I'm sure he didn't know how special he is, but the fact they grew when no other cells grew made them unique.
Yes, you're right. Now, Gloria, having heard all of this, what do you feel about it?
Well, I first was introduced when Rebecca came to UCSF and shared excerpts from the book.
This is the author.
The author. And I sat there and I said, this is unbelievable. No wonder there's so much mistrust around the medical community and people of color not wanting to participate in research and clinical trials. And I was working with San Mateo County on a number of health-related projects because of our health committee. And I said to them, we need to either have the author come or a family member come, and we need to tell this story. We need to tell the story to our community. Actually, I bought 5 books that day, and I donated a book to San Mateo County, and I said, everyone in this health department needs to read this book.
Why?
And I think it's still circulating around. I think because it's important for health professionals to know what happened to this woman and what has happened to others in the communities of color, and why there's that level of mistrust. And so what can we do collectively so that we can begin to involve more communities of color in research and clinical trials?
Did Rebecca, when you talked with her, did she tell you how she came to write the book?
Well, she talked to the entire, it was just a packed house at UCSF. But similar to what David said, and that she was very persistent, and that, you know, she, I think, made a personal commitment that she was going to get this story told.
Sure. Now, David, it's been said that at that time, shortly after your grandmother died, the family went through some very hard times, with one of the family members being homeless and another one later committed to a mental institution. How did it change your lives afterwards? Did your lives, well, let me ask it this way. When did your lives begin to change? And did they, that assumes that they did begin to change.
For the family, I guess, like I said, that was 1951, before my time when she passed away. And honestly, my grandfather and my uncle, they were the two who knew Henrietta the best and witnessed what she went through. They rarely talked about what happened back in the days, and I always attribute to they actually seen what Henrietta went through, the suffering she had when, you know, you have cancer. And, you know, the limited medication you had back then because of the limited knowledge they had of it. So they actually experienced. So they never really told us what happened afterwards. It's just they continued to, you know, live, I mean, go on with their lives without Henrietta. And, I mean, it took an effect on Dale, you know, because she always wanted to know her mother. And that's one of the reasons her and Rebecca went on this crusade to learn about Henrietta Lacks and the healer cells, because she felt it would help her get closer to her mother, because she would learn about her. And she also wanted the world to know what contribution her mother made, because, like I said, many people didn't know. Even her family, like I say, even us, we didn't even know all that has been accomplished. We only know, like I said, it went up to space and it was instrumental in curing polio. But beyond that, all the other discoveries and all the other stuff that has been used for, we didn't really learn until Rebecca's book came out.
And how did your lives change afterwards?
After the book came out, well, I guess I would say it opened the doors to us in the medical community. Like I said, as far as Black families doing speaking engagements, learning more knowledge about Henrietta, and, you know, learning about the healer cells, like all we didn't know, now we know so much more about it. And then it's now that we travel around the country speaking on it, speaking on Henrietta, speaking on the healer cells, speaking on the issues that the book brought up, you know, trying to make changes in the world, trying to make things better by getting involved and being involved.
So Lisa, you talked about how it was a shock for you and how it was all overwhelming for you. So what has happened in the interim since that, the first recognitions?
Well, similar to Gloria, I bought several copies and gave it to several of my colleagues to read. There was discussion around it, and actually Gloria and I had talked about that we needed to educate our community around clinical trials. And so when this opportunity, that was several years ago, and then when this opportunity came up, that we could actually have some of the family members come and talk about it, we saw this as an opportunity to educate our community And at the same time, as you, it's sort of like that Oprah moment. It's like, now that you know, what are you going to do about it? And it's like, it's great that we're going to educate our community, but we also want to empower our community to take the next step.
And what would be the next step, Gloria?
I think the Friday program, bringing in researchers, bringing in scientists that are involved in clinical trials, to talk to an audience of both the community and people in the medical field, so that there's some dialogue between the two, and to have those questions answered, because there'll be a lot of questions
like what?
Around mistrust, around the ethical issues and what has happened as a result of not only Henrietta Lax's story, but others that have been involved in telling people about what's going to happen if they become involved in a clinical trial.
Ah, okay. Now, we know there was the Syphilis Project.
Yes.
And you want to talk, yes, the Tuskegee Project. You want to say a few words about that? Because that was another example where people were used.
Yes.
They were alive at the time, and they weren't told anything.
Right.
And so what can you tell us about that?
Well, again, it's another scenario where people are experimented on without their permission, without really disclosing what are going to be some of the side effects. And in this case, very negative side effects. If
Syphilis. They were given syphilis.
They were given syphilis. And again, it kind of perpetuates this whole mistrust. I mean, in Henrietta Lax's situation, you took something away from her and her family without their permission. And then in this, the Tuskegee experiment, you were giving people, giving them something, and just let it go.
Giving them something that could cause all types of harmful health effects.
Yes, exactly.
And with a disease that they could pass on.
Yes,
Right.
exactly.
Exactly. And so no wonder there's all the feelings of mistrust and not becoming involved in any kind of clinical trials or research in our communities of color, and especially in our African American community.
Okay, now before we talk a little bit more about the clinical trials, David, your family at that time had been going through some difficult times, and once the book came out, was there money? I mean, Johns Hopkins, I guess this is another reason that there is so much alarm, was selling the cells to institutions throughout the world and to other hospitals, and selling them. And the family wasn't given any compensation.
Gave them away, and it's the pharmaceutical companies and I guess the other companies that mass produce scalar cells that actually sells them, and now they actually buy them themselves. Now, I guess in 2010 when the book came out, I know like a lot of people sometimes think, I guess we were like experiencing super hardship, but I think we just an average American family living normal lives. I mean, I'm trying to think how to put this. Because I guess we was normal, like working normal day-to-day job. I traveled around the country doing IT work. My uncle retired from the railroad. My father did truck driving. So we were just a normal, average American family, living our daily lives, middle class. So I know the book, since I guess like in 1951 when Henrietta Live was around, and like I said, it was a little bit, income wages was lower, but in 2010 we was all pretty much well off.
Oh, were you?
Not rich, but not dirt poor.
So was there any compensation given by the hospital to the family?
None whatsoever. We have never been compensated for any of the sales.
Did you ever attempt, anybody representing you ever attempt to negotiate with the hospital?
My uncle and a couple of my uncles had worked with some lawyers to try to get something, see what could be done, but a lot they say the statutes of limitations have run out, and he was like, well, how is that possible? The cells are still being in use. And at the time, they said the laws wasn't in place. What they did at the time, 1951, wasn't illegal. They was just taking samples of anybody who came in. As Henrietta just happened to have special cells.
So
they're looking into it, but like I said, nothing has came up yet.
Sure. Now, is it still something that's ongoing, or is it something that's closed?
No, I'm not aware of it as ongoing or closed. I just know that, like I said, they continue to look at it, but I'm not involved in that process of it for the most part.
Sure, sure. Now, royalties from the book, did you get anything from the book?
The book, the money goes to the foundation, and then the foundation has been used to help Black family members with medical situations and going to school.
The irony of it all...
nothing directly.
Yes, the irony of it all I read was that Johns Hopkins was set up to help people who were poor and indigent. And it was the only hospital in Baltimore at that time that provided health services to African Americans.
Wow.
That's correct. In 1951, Johns Hopkins was one of the few hospitals that accepted African Americans and treated them. Dr. William Wade was the one who referred Henrietta to Johns Hopkins because he was a local community doctor in the station where she lived, but he could only do so much. So he referred her to Johns Hopkins because, like I said, they was one of the few that accepted African Americans. So
tell us about the foundation. Is it a foundation called Henrietta Lax's Foundation?
It is one, I guess, by Rebecca Skloop, where she uses the funds. She has proceeds from the book goes to the foundation, and she uses the funds to, help people who have been part of a medical experiment, as you would say, like the syphilis event, or just not the Lax family, but the Lax family has benefit as well, but it's open to everybody who applies.
Oh, so this is something, and maybe I should be asking Gloria or Lisa, who might know, if this is something that happens quite often, where people might get experimented on or be a part of a clinical trial without their knowledge. Would you know?
I think that perhaps then, but not now.
Now, there are very strict
yes.
regulations around clinical design. There's usually internal review boards. There's consent forms of the wazoo in terms of people, in terms of when you participate in a clinical trial, there's full disclosure in the clinical trial. So there has been, I think, a lot of progress around safety concerns and privacy concerns for people that participate in clinical trials. However, because of the mistrust that has built up over the years, communities of color are still very reluctant to participate in a clinical trial. I know personally my stepfather, when he got cancer, we were working on an experiment, and I asked him if he would be interested in participating in one of our clinical trials, if he qualified, because there's criteria that needs to be followed. And he was very hesitant. Even though I was working for the company that was making the drug, he still was hesitant about participating in this clinical trial.
Did he eventually, or he didn't at all?
He didn't. He wanted to use the standard course for his cancer, but he was reluctant about participating in the clinical trial. So that gives you an indication at the level of mistrust that has built up in our communities, even when we have access to knowledge around it, we still haven't.
And have relatives or know somebody involved behind the scenes.
Yes.
So, having talked about the clinical trial, did anything happen in terms of it because of it that was beneficial? The one that you were involved?
Yes, the drug is on the market.
Oh, really?
And yes, and it's doing very well. So.
What, in terms of helping people combat cancer?
Yes.
Or?
Yes. So, again, going back to the issue of mistrust that builds up in our community, even when we are provided with information, even when we do know people that are involved in this process, there's still that hesitancy about participating.
Well, I think part of it too, is it that we have a mistrust of not only clinical trials, but a mistrust of government in general.
And the medical system.
community.
Yes, and the medical system.
So this is something that goes
Much
deep,
bigger
that
than
has
just
nothing
clinical
to
trials.
do with people of color, but people in general.
Well, I think people of color, because there are so many barriers and lack of knowledge of how to navigate the healthcare system. So if they can't manage that, then you're going to tell them to participate in a clinical trial. They're like, look, I just have problems getting to the doctor for a checkup, and you're going to talk to me about clinical trials?
Well, usually, sometimes these clinical trials pay you, don't they?
They do, but I think the mistrust kind of supersedes the amount of money that one receives. And Lisa could probably address that a little bit more than I, but I think that's one of the reasons why we're having the Friday program, to hopefully educate our community around why clinical trials are important, and the protection that people get who are involved in clinical trials because of the patient, the whole privacy and all that goes along with protecting the patient.
Sure. David, I assume you're still with
Yes.
us. There was a movie made in addition to the book. Was the family a part of
Yes.
the movie? Were you consulted on the movie?
Yes, we was consulting. The two brothers and one of my sisters and Deborah's son was all consultants on the movie.
Yes, it's my understanding Deborah, who was the youngest child, died in 2009, just before the book came out.
Yes, he passed away right before the book came out.
And
Rebecca did finish it, and she sent a manuscript, but she's like, I lived it and I don't have to read it.
oh, really?
So,
Yes. Yes.
so she was aware. She just didn't see all that came up because of the book.
And what about the movie? What was...
Well, she had envisioned that Oprah would play her one day. But like I said, she passed away in 2009. Like Rebecca got tapes, audio tapes of her saying that you just your book gonna become a movie and Oprah gonna play me and so and so and so and so. So she foreseen that it would be successful.
Sure. And what did you think of the movie?
I liked the movie. I think the actors did a great job. It kind of left me wanting more. Like, Oprah did a great job. You forgot she was Oprah and you actually thought she was on Dale. And the other characters who played my aunts and uncles, I wanted to see more of them. So I liked it. But it could have been a 3-part miniseries. That way we could see more of the other characters.
Sure.
And Henrietta is even though I know Rosemont wasn't my Henrietta, but you kind of connect with her.
Sure. And the proceeds from the book, some of the proceeds go to the foundation. Are there
Yes.
proceeds, residuals from the movie?
I have no idea. I wasn't involved in that aspect of it.
Sure. And when you talk about traveling all over the country speaking, where do you speak and what type of reception do you have?
We speak at universities, hospitals, pharmaceutical companies, book clubs, and the reception is overwhelmingly positive. Some people we go to, they like the place is sold out or it's standing room only. We're like, wow. So the families are in shock, and we appreciate the support and that we have got from the community and how everybody has accepted us and embraced the book and look forward and like to hear what we have to say.
Well, it's interesting that you should go to pharmaceutical companies that are primarily profit-making companies.
Right. Well, we believe that, honestly, I guess like I say, I always tell people, diseases are going to affect everybody. So, like I say, clinical trials and things that are done are needed, they're necessary. But if you can't change it, the way to change things is get involved. Don't take a blind eye or a back seat to it. Because, like I said, it is necessary. We're going to need, because everybody's going to be affected by disease one day. So
Sure.
the best way to make sure that what happened to Henrietta that doesn't happen again is to also be involved in the process.
Yes. Now you
So
will.
I do understand, like I said, the mistrust that the African American community has because of the past narrative, and that's one of the reasons we decided to get involved and try to change the narrative. From the most part, we always been like stuck out on the outskirts. Now we're trying to get involved on the inner part of it.
Sure. Now, you will be participating. We've heard several times on the show how there is an event coming up. You will be participating? Are you coming to California to participate?
Yes,
You are?
I will be there at the end of the month.
Okay, at the end of
So I
this
look
month.
forward to it.
Yes. Okay, now, we've talked in passing about the event coming up. What is the event and how did it come into being?
I believe the event came into being as a result of Rebecca coming to UCSF. I came back to the health committee and I said, we need to expose our constituency about who Henrietta Lacks is and her contributions. And as a health committee, it just seemed the right thing to do. And so we talked about it for several years, and everything came into play, and the pieces came together about almost a year ago now. And we decided to move ahead with an evening with Gila, and we were fortunate enough to have David and Shirley come to,
And Shirley
who will
is?
be coming to a sister-in-law. Is that correct, David?
Yes.
Okay, we'll be
She's,
coming.
yes, sister-in-law. She's married to David Black.
Right, we'll be coming to. Right, we'll be the two participants and at Cappuccino High School on February the 1st, and then to follow up with a Friday seminar that Lisa has already spoken about.
And I'm opening my invitation now.
Great. At the Foster City Center. And we're just very excited about both programs.
Now, the evening with Gila, what is it?
Well, it's the evening for both David and Shirley to have that opportunity to share their story and give a presentation. There will be books available for people to purchase and have them sign them. This is just, it's also a fundraiser for both our organization, African American Community Health Advisory Committee, as well as the Peninsula chapter, San Francisco Peninsula chapter of the Delta Sigma Theta. So that's sort of the essence of that evening, is just kind of give people that level of awareness. We anticipate people from all different walks of life to participate and attend this event. There's a lot of excitement around it. When we were kind of shopping the idea to potential sponsors, people were very excited and wanted to get on board and participate and support the event. And then, of course, the next day is the seminar. And the other point I wanted to make about this is not only do we want to educate our community around clinical trials, we also want to bring the scientific community in the fold, because there are researchers out there that are trying to diversify the design of their clinical trials and have diverse patient populations. And we thought it would be good, in the spirit of inclusion, to bring both those communities together, because there may be some unique needs around communities of color that the scientific community needs to be aware of when they decide to design a clinical trial. So it's really, we see it as a reciprocal relationship. We see it as a partnership and an opportunity and a forum for people to work together.
Sure. Usually the clinical trials, how often do we read that perhaps it was white men of perhaps a certain age, and the findings don't necessarily apply to women, to children or
Communities of color.
yes, or to communities of
And
color.
so this is one of the reasons why the Friday morning program is going to be so important and, you know, valuable to for both the community and for researchers, and having both in the as attendees, I think will heighten this whole awareness around clinical trials and research. I might also say that we're just very pleased that San Mateo County Health Systems is also a partnering with us.
Yes.
With this effort. They have been there for us, and they know, and we know that they service a huge number of people in the county of San Mateo, and how valuable this information could be to their consumers also.
So I would think, David, as Gloria is talking about the people who would be served and how valuable the information is, it's not only to the residents of San Mateo County, but to people throughout the country or throughout the world. So what does all of this mean to you, David? Your grandmother's cells were very unique, and it seems that what has happened from the 1951 is something that might be considered very unique and special.
Oh, we definitely view Henrietta as very unique and special. Like I said, she was the first, and she still, to the day, like I said, that Taylor cells are one of the most resilient ones out there. But with the family, I guess, like I said, despite the way that it happened, we are extremely proud of everything that's happened, that her cells have contributed to so many, you know, breakthroughs in medical science that help people. Often, one time I got asked a question, why was Henrietta important? And I was like, because she existed. And because she existed, those healer cells existed. And because the healer cells existed, millions of people around the world have a new walk of life that they may not never had.
So does that soothe some of the bitterness that has grown out of this whole affair?
Yes. Like I say, if you Henrietta has over 40 descendants, and if you ask each of them, each one have a different opinion, but across the board, all of us are extremely proud of what the cells have done.
So I talked in the beginning, in the introduction, about family bitterness. Has this been divisive in terms of the family, and if so, how, and what lessons can be learned, if any?
Well, not so advice. Like I say, some of us have different, like my cousin, some of us have different opinions, but we still want family. Like I say, any family you come across that have different opinions of how things should be done or how it works. But like I said, at the end of the day, we family. We at the Christmas party together. We at cookouts. We do everything together. It's just there's some aspects of it. Some family like, okay, they shouldn't be used, but the majority of things, you know, all the good that has been done. You know, how can we not?
Sure. So, Lisa, what do you see down the road? Or what would you like to see?
Well, I think a couple of things. I would like to see the Henrietta family given the recognition that they are due.
And you don't think they've been given that yet sufficiently?
I think we've started, but I think we have a ways to go. And I want to just personally thank David for being on this show and for him coming out and agreeing, along with Shirley, to participate in our event. Because there's a human face to this story, and it not only impacted Henrietta, it impacted her entire family. And I think that message needs to continue, because there's still people that don't know the story, even though there's a book out, even though there's been a movie with Oprah in it. People are still don't always see the connection and the impact that this has had.
Well, a lot of people would say, so what? We don't know about it, so what? How does that change our lives?
Well, but when they understand how her cells were used to create vaccines and medicines that have saved people's lives, when you make that connection, it gets real fast. When a person says, hey, well, like you said, how does this impact me? I said, well, was there anybody in your family struggling with polio or some other disease? And now there's a cure for that, or there's a vaccine for that. That's because they had these cells lines were used to do the research for that. And that's how it impacts other people.
Well, people would say that there are other cells that are also being used for medical purposes, and we don't know who the owners of those cells are. So what difference does it make?
But the way that these cells came into fruition is what I think is the crux of the matter. And the fact that a lot of times you've created, here is an African American woman whose cells have been used, and you have African Americans that aren't interested or are very mistrustful of the clinical trial process and health systems in general. So there's irony in that.
Yes.
Well, I would also say add maybe African Americans who've been kept out of the system.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Oh, absolutely. No question about it.
Yes.
Because they aren't qualified.
Right.
And yet, on some level, they're qualified
Precisely.
Yes.
to be a part of clinical trials
Right.
or to have their cells used or...
And I think we have to create a scenario where it's reciprocal on all ends, because what happens is we know the population is diversifying itself, contrary to what we've heard. And that you need to have a diverse patient population so you can see how effective the drug is going to be in a diverse world. So it behooves a company or a researcher to keep that in mind, that, you know, if you are into saving lives, if you want to be able to save a diversity of lives, you need to have a diverse patient population when you're designing your clinical trials.
So, David, I think we heard that Henrietta Lacks's genes, GENES, were sequenced and information about the DNA.
Really? I hadn't heard that.
I don't know. Have you heard anything about that? Do you know anything about that? Do you know anything about the family's medical history because of those cells?
I sit on the board at NIH that reviews the sequence. Henrietta's in 2013. Henrietta's cells were sequenced. Without notifying the family, so we're like, here we go again. But this time, Rebecca Stubbe did an op-ed in the New York Times, and Dr. Francis Collins, the head of the NIH, had reached out to us. And subsequently, the German scientists realized what they did, and they removed her sequence from the public, from the internet. And then they proceeded over a 4-month period of time to talk with the family and see how we wanted to proceed. We were given the option we could remove it completely and not be used, or we could leave it out there and open for everybody to use, or we could come up with a ground in the middle. But we decided we wanted to come up with something in the middle because, like I said in the past, the family is extremely proud of what the healer cells has accomplished. But we just didn't like the fact that we was in the dark for so long, like so many African American history. Like we didn't know our history, we didn't know nothing about this.
So
we thought it would be best to, yes.
I'm sorry.
Oh, no, we thought it would be best to come up with a compromise where the genome sequence could be used, but it would go through a committee when the committee has Black family members on it.
Yes, yes.
That way they'll be out in the open, but we'll also have involvement. Instead of like in 1951 and 1972, we were the last to know. This time we'll be the first to know what's going on.
Yes.
Sure. Now,
But we still want to help science go forward.
Did you find out anything about your family's medical history that might be important to you now?
Well, one of the things I always tell them on stage is that, when we're looking at the sequence, Henrietta has a certain sequence that allow her to absorb coffee and how the hue around the eye, and also she has a gene that resists baldness. And I tell people, obviously I didn't get that one. But beyond that, no, we haven't learned too much. Or we're not putting that out there like that.
Okay.
Well, given everything that's been found out because of her cells, I'm wondering, and I could go back to you, David, or Lisa, or Gloria, and ask you, would you have your cells sequenced? Have you been a part of any DNA studies, 1, 2, 3 and Me, or What's the other?
Oh, 23andMe?
Yes, 23andMe.
Actually, our family has talked about it, and I think we'll eventually do that. But again, there's always this, like, what's going to happen? Like, I get the information about my DNA sequence, but where's that information going? Is it, is it anonymous, or where is it going? And I think that's another discussion too, is like, when you decide to do this, where does the information go, and most importantly, how is it going to be used?
Yes, and can the government later come back? You know, it's interesting, my daughter got me, for the holidays, one of those kits, and I've always wanted to do it. However, I haven't done it yet. I mean, and she tells me she got me the one where there's more privacy protection. However, I was also approached by the hospital that I'm a patient of, and they wanted to do it. And I haven't consented to that yet. Trust issues, not because of my ethnicity, but just trust issues in general.
Yes.
And what about you, Gloria?
I think similarly, I have not participated in a clinical trial for, nor am I leaning towards providing a lot of information yet. I'm just not quite there.
Do you want to find out about any family members you don't know about?
I'm not sure I do at this point right now.
Lisa?
Yes, I would be very interested in knowing, particularly by African Americans, because a lot of us have a multicultural background, just because of the history of how we came to this country. So I would definitely be interested in knowing the genealogy of the family. I think the other part of it, though, is, those companies also can provide you with information about your medical history, or what you might be more of a risk at having certain diseases, which I think is also important. But again, I think it's an early industry, and so what are all the safeguards that are put in place?
Sure.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Like, do insurance companies get access to this information?
Or potential employers.
Or employers get information?
For their insurance purposes. And
or pharmaceutical companies? I mean, those are the kind of questions that I hope, as a result of our events, that we can get some answers to some of that. What are the safeguards? What does happen when you have a clinical trial and you're giving up, saliva or blood or whatever? What happens to that information?
What will we be told will happen to it?
Yes, yes. But
and I think that's probably my ambivalence right now, in just the unknown. So hopefully I'll live long enough that I will, feel more confident, or my children, my grandchildren, certainly.
Sure. Now, David.
Yes.
Your grandmother's genes were sequenced, or the DNA. Did you find out more about your history? More about any family members you didn't know about?
Oh, no. Part of the agreement as far as using the sequence, we won't look into ancestry. So for anybody who uses the sequence, that's one of the agreements that is used for medical purposes and not ancestry purposes.
Okay.
So would you be interested down the line, down the road? I think your family originally came from Virginia.
Sequence, maybe, could you be like part of 23andMe or one of them? I'm sure they're great companies, but right now, so like, if I would do it, I want to have like control over it, know where it goes, and who sees it, like the other guests of the press. It's like, you want more knowledge of what's going on.
Sure.
It's not a bad thing, it's just you want to be more in control of your information.
Especially given the history of what happened in your family. Do you have, we're coming to the end, and I'm wondering, are there any thoughts that you'd like to leave us with?
Oh, gosh. Let's see, I'm trying to think. I'm like that, to look forward to, I guess, coming to San Francisco now at the end of the month to do the program and gaining knowledge and pass my family's history on. as far as medical clinical trials research is like at some point we gotta get involved because we don't want to be we don't want to be left behind. So I do advocate for it, but I also advocate that you know what you're doing, what you're getting into, you know your rights, and be informed. And if you want to be engaged, being really engaged in it.
Sure. David, I'm going to turn to Lisa and see if she has any final thoughts she'd like to share. And be thinking, Gloria.
Well, one of the things is we see this as a launching pad, this conversation that we're going to have on February 1st and then the seminar. We anticipate this, we want this to be a catalyst, a launching pad for people to continue the conversation, get more information, make those connections. Those various companies that you mentioned will be there. We have an FDA person that's going to be there. We've got academic, scientific folks there, UCSF and Stanford. So we see this as an ongoing journey of really being inclusive and diversifying clinical trials that impacts and helps everyone.
Sure.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I think that we have a golden opportunity to expose our community to clinical trials and research that's going on, and also be able to hear from the LAC's family members. I think that we're very, very excited about the upcoming two-day program.
I think we have some information that could be put on the screen for our viewers in terms of contact information. Maybe we have it. What's the best way if people wanted to come to the event or wanted to find out more information?
I think they can go directly to our website, aachAC.org.
And would you repeat it?
aachAC.org. And that way you go in, you'll find out a little bit about the health committee, but you can also, it will direct you to the URL.
All right. And is this an event that's free?
Thursday night is not free. Tickets are $75. Friday is free, but space is limited at this point.
Sure. Anything else you'd like to say, David? We have a few seconds.
I don't know. I'm just looking forward to it and looking forward to learning and looking forward to being at the event.
Okay, Lisa?
Yes, and I just wanted to say that it is $25 for students.
That's right.
And there are scholarships available as well, so we want to try to be as inclusive as we can.
Well, it certainly seems like, it sounds like it's going to be a unique experience, just like those HeLa cells.
Yes.
A unique experience and a unique opportunity. I'd like to first thank you, David, for being here to join us to talk about your family and your grandmother. I'd like to thank you, Lisa.
Thank you.
Sure, Gloria.
Thank you very much.
And
Henrietta.
last, but very important, I'd like to thank our viewers for watching. Until next time.